Good morning, Highlands Presbyterian. So today our sermon is Genesis 32, starting at verse 22. And so this is sort of the second dream event of Jacob's. We talked about Jacob's ladder last week. This week we're talking about Jacob wrestling with God. So picking up in verse 22, the same night Jacob arose, he took his wives, his female servants, his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had, and Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So, Chattanooga, where Rachel and I have the first of two children, is about 5 hours from Cincinnati, where our families live. Well, it's 4.5 hours if you don't stop, which is what we did when we were younger, but that was when we didn't have kids, right? It's a longer trip after that, right? Sometimes I think Google Maps should have a kid feature that adds some time to the trip and maybe another hour on the front end as you're packing up the kids and all the things that go with that. And maybe a little extra time to go back into the house for the things that you forgot. But I digress, right? There was one memorable trip when one of the kids, still under a year old, started to fuss on the way, and we were trying to make it through right in one go, and started looking at the clock, and we were still like an hour and a half out, and it was sort of like, this probably isn't going to work out, but we really wanted to go without stopping, because you've been in the car for a while and you just want to get there. But then, right, the kid starts fussing louder and louder and louder, and eventually starts to scream, and it's sort of this battle of wills, right? I'm driving faster, as though that's going to make a big difference. But there's this screaming going on, and so finally we stop and we do all the things, right, to try to calm the kid down, and it's just not working. And so finally we realize there's only thing to do is just to keep driving, and so the last 45 minutes I remember driving home, just wailing in the back seat, nothing we can do about it. And so it was a journey marked by adversity, right? Filled with uncertainty in the last few miles. Felt like they took forever. Right? And it's not entirely dissimilar, right, to Jacob's journey home. Right? As mentioned like last week, so he was a scoundrel, a trickster, not exactly a model who you'd want to model your life after. He tricked his brother. He left for 20 years, and now he's returning home. But Esau, his brother, who's been tricked, who's had this anger building up to him, right, is coming to meet him, Jacob learns, with this army of 400 people. And so Jacob is traveling home, knowing that there's probably this hostile party coming after him in his journey, right, marked by adversity, filled with uncertainty. The last few miles felt like they took forever. This is not how he planned that his journey would go. Right? And so on the last night of his journey, he sends his family across the river. And then he retreats to spend the night on his own, uncertain of what was ahead. And it's there on the banks of the river that he has this incredible encounter. Right? In a night, a stranger comes to wrestle with him. And they wrestle through the night, and neither party is prevailing. And the stranger touches Jacob's hip, putting it out of joint, which sounds horribly painful. Whatever I was holding on to at that point, I would certainly let go. But still, Jacob clings to his opponent, refusing to let go. And Jacob tells his opponent he will only release him once the stranger blesses him. And so the stranger changes his name from Jacob to Israel. And in verse 30, just before the break of day, Jacob realizes he has been wrestling with God and survived. And he goes from this place to meet his brother. And he's limping because of the stranger's touch on his hip. He's forever changed by this encounter he has on the banks of the river, where he was alone, marked by adversity, filled with uncertainty. And these final few miles felt like they took forever. Right? It's a peculiar story. There's all sorts of speculation about who the stranger might have been if it wasn't God, right? So read stuff suggesting it was a river demon or Esau in disguise, but Hosea, right, helps us to interpret that it's either God or an angel that is indeed wrestling with Jacob. But it's odd, right? Because why would such a figure have to beg to be let go, right? Their strength is so much stronger than Jacob's grasp. So they must have wanted to be there, right? And perhaps it is God, and this is the idea that if Jacob looks upon God when the dawn comes, right, then perhaps he would have died, right? And we ask, well, what's the significance of the hip injury? And I sort of think of it as the same way that we think of Paul. Paul talks about having this thorn in the flesh, right? Some injury that he prayed to God to be removed, but that prayer wasn't answered, and so Paul carried that thorn for the rest of his life, right? Perhaps as a reminder that God works through weakness, a reminder of where true strength comes from and what gives us the strength to sustain and move on. That we are weak, but God is strong, and so God compensates for our weakness. Right? In many ways, I think this text has something to teach us about where we are right here and now in the 21st century. Right? The New Testament tells us that all of Scripture is helpful for instruction. And I believe that's true when it comes to the story. Right? To begin with, Jacob is alone in the story. He's in the night by himself, awaiting an uncertain outcome the next day. Right? Jacob doesn't know what's coming. And while he's there in that vulnerable state, with who knows what going through his mind, but likely a lot of anxiety, right? He's attacked by this unknown stranger, adding extra stress and anxiety to him. And when Jacob fights back, he's severely wounded, such that he is limping the next day, right? A serious enough injury that it shaped the dietary practices of generations going forward. So this is serious. All of this Jacob is dealing with when he's already overburdened by what he's going to face, right? How many of you know what this is like, right? Right, in the past week, right, when you're watching the news, how often did you feel alone, scared, vulnerable? Right? How often did it feel like we as a society have been attacked in a vulnerable place? Right? I watched my kids go to school this week with an uncertainty in my heart, right? I can't begin to imagine what the people in Uvalde have gone through, right? The range of emotions the parents have experienced, right? But we as an entire people are wounded by these actions to the extent that it shapes the way we live, the way we interact with one another, right? The nature of our attackers is very different, but we as a people have been attacked, feel vulnerable, uncertain, afraid. Right? St. John of the Cross is this mystic figure who coined the term the dark night of the soul. He wrote a poem about his spiritual journey and the hardships he faced in seeking God. Right? The phrase refers to a spiritual depression that can be part of one's journey of faith. Right? Most people aren't immune from it at some point in their lives. Right? After Mother Teresa died and they revealed her journals, right, we were all shocked to discover that her reflecting on periods of darkness and coldness and spiritual isolation, right? No one is immune from this. It's part of the human experience, right? There are valleys of the shadow of death, to use the language from Psalm 23. But what's important to note, right, here in Genesis 32 is that dawn comes. We pass through the valley. Right? For Jacob, who endures through the dark night, through this adverse experience, he finds a blessing in the morning. Right? He holds on to God through the night, even in the midst of uncertainty, even enduring physical and likely spiritual pain, and he is blessed in the morning. Right? There is hope that comes with the dawn. right? But even then, he isn't healed of all the pain that he experienced with the night, right? The pain is still real. The scars linger on as he travels to meet Esau. But he is blessed nevertheless. The scars don't take that away, right? It makes me think of when Jesus was resurrected, right? He went to a room and he stood among the disciples and he held out his hands and the scars were still there. He said to Thomas, "Put your hand in my side. The scar from the spear remains." Jesus' resurrection body, it was different, and yet it still held on to the scars, right? The scars we obtain in our life hold some significance, perhaps as a reminder of what it is that we have overcome. Right? Jacob doesn't give up, and because he doesn't give up, he is blessed in the morning that comes at the end of the night. Right? It's a story. Genesis 32 is a story of perseverance. For all of Jacob's fault, and he has plenty, just like I do, just like we all do, he perseveres even in the face of adversity. He has not given up, but he has held on in the dark of night and emerged into the next day. Right? It's a story of faith, right? To be a Christian is not just to leap from sort of mountaintop to mountaintop to mountaintop. Right? Faith can be hard at times. Right? It can be joyful and wondrous. But the story of faith is that we work through hard things. We emerge from some of the dark nights of the soul. We have scars, but we emerge nevertheless. And I think it's appropriate, right, to think about this on Memorial Day weekend, when we remember those who have fought and sacrificed, right? Because we as a country have endured hard things before, and we're scarred because of it. We carry those scars, and we remember them particularly on Memorial Day. But because of those efforts and those sacrifices, we have emerged from the dark nights. We look forward in hope because we did hard things, right? It's been a hard week. It's been hard to read the news. We've likely wept for what has been lost. Right? And in the midst of the dark night, what do? Like Jacob, we hold on to God. We persevere. We don't give up. And so we think, well, what does this look like in modern life? And if I could encourage you to do one thing, it's to read the Psalms. Set aside some time. Read one Psalm every day. Work your way through that, and you will develop a rich language for prayer. Right? There's some beautiful, some lofty language in the Psalms, teaching us how to pray, how to exalt God. If you want to learn how to pray, read the Psalms. Because there's also plenty of language born out of pain and despair, right? The Psalms echo the depths of David's heart when he is fleeing for his life. It echoes his pain of despair. If I descend to the depths, O God, right? The Psalms are what Jesus quotes when he is dying on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? Right? It gives us these two things. A language for when we are deep in the pit of despair, when we are in the valley of the shadow of death. But it also teaches us that God gives us a path through the valley of despair, because the Psalms are a gift from God. Right? It's part of Scripture that is given to us to teach us about ourselves and to teach us about God, right? God gives us the Psalms because God knows we're going to go through despair, but God doesn't want us to get stuck there. God doesn't want us to stay there. God knows, though, that we're going to need language to pray while we are in the valley, right? Even the Psalms that accuse God of not being near are a gift to us, because God knows that we're going to need that language, that we're going to experience that, but that it's not the end of our experience, because, right, the Psalms move on and we move through these valleys. So keep praying, friends, even in the midst of your anger. Even if there's only anger in your prayers, right? There's anger in the Psalms. It's there for us to teach us how to pray even in our anger. And it keeps us in dialogue with God. Right? It's us, like Jacob, holding on in the midst of adversity, in the midst of uncertainty, in the midst of fear. It's teaching us how to hold on to God even when we don't know what's going on and what the next step is. We hold on to God. and we trust that even in our fear that there's a blessing that is coming. Even if we don't know when, even if we don't know where, even if we don't know what it looks like, even if we're gaining scars, we know that there's a blessing. Think of Jesus in the garden before he's arrested, praying with all of his soul, looking for another way, but trusting that there's life on the other side of what he's facing, even if he's facing death. Right? Jacob was blessed after a long night of wrestling. He refused to let go of God. Right? And it's interesting to me think of God submitting God's self to Jacob, allowing Jacob to hold on. Despite this vast difference, this gulf of strength, God allows Jacob to hold on like God allows us to hold on, right? It's a picture of what Jesus does for us. Jesus submits to human strength, right? He could have easily called down this legion of angels to defeat his opponents, but he came to submit to human strength, to allow human strength to hold him. But for those who persevered, they discovered the tomb was empty. For those who persevered, who held on, they found the blessing on that first Easter morning. Right? The dark night of the crucifixion had ended. There was hope in the dawn because they held on. So let us hold on, even when we're uncertain, even when we're anxious. Like Jacob, can we hold on to God and hold on to one another? Even in our anger, we pray through the Psalms and we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and we discover that dawn comes in the morning on the other side of the dark night of the soul. As we wrestle with uncertainty and in the darkness, may we remember that the blessing comes from God. And there is hope, and there is light on the other side of it.